Why does the Bible mention giants only in passing, as if they were a forgotten memory? And why do ancient texts outside the canon describe a race so vast and terrifying that the ground trembled beneath their steps? Hidden in the pages of the Book of Enoch lies a story almost erased from history. A story of heavenly beings called the Watchers, their forbidden union with human women, and the monstrous offspring who came to be known as the Nephilim. It is a tale of power, corruption, and judgment, a mystery that may hold clues for our world today. Imagine for a moment, angels descending not in radiant glory, but in rebellion. Their wings darkened, their eyes burning with desire, their hearts bound not to God, but to their own passions. They were sent to guide and protect humanity, but instead they were captivated by its beauty. They stepped across a line that heaven had drawn, and in doing so, they unleashed a chain of events that changed the course of history. What began as secret desire would end in cosmic catastrophe. But who were these Watchers, and why did their actions provoke such devastating consequences? Were they truly responsible for the creation of giants, being so immense they became the stuff of legend? And if so, why has this part of the story been hidden away, left out of the Bibles we hold in our hands today? The book of Genesis gives us only a brief, cryptic line. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. A sentence and nothing more. But Enoch, grandfather of Noah, a man who walked so closely with God that he was taken up without seeing death, records the full account. His writings reveal a world where the boundaries between heaven and earth were broken, where divine beings walked among mortals, and where forbidden knowledge flowed into human hands. For centuries, these writings were considered too dangerous, too unsettling, to be widely read. Yet today, they resurface, raising questions we cannot ignore. And perhaps the greatest question of all is this: if the Watchers once walked among us, leaving behind a legacy of violence and corruption, could their shadows still linger in the world we live in now? This is not merely an ancient myth. It is a story of temptation, rebellion, and judgment, a story that echoes into the present moment. For in understanding what happened to the Watchers and the Nephilim, we may also understand something about ourselves, about the dangers of unchecked desire, and about a God who will not let corruption go unanswered. The story begins not with mankind, but with those who were meant to watch over it, and their fall is the reason giants once walked the earth. The Book of Enoch tells us that there was once a group of angels, known as the Watchers, who were appointed by God to watch over humanity. They were not messengers like Gabriel, nor warriors like Michael, but guardians, observers meant to guide mankind into wisdom and righteousness. Their role was sacred, their mission divine. But what began as stewardship would soon turn to seduction. Enoch describes them descending upon the slopes of Mount Hermon, a mountain that would forever be marked by their decision. 200 in number, they stood together and made a pact. Their leader, Shemahazah, feared that some might waver, that they might recoil from what they were about to do. So he bound them with an oath, ensuring that none could turn back. The oath was not to God, but to each other, to commit together the greatest rebellion since Lucifer himself fell from heaven. And what was this rebellion? The Watchers looked upon the daughters of men and desired them. They were captivated by human beauty, driven by passion, and unwilling to resist. And so they took wives for themselves, crossing a boundary never meant to be broken. These beings of heaven entwined themselves with flesh and blood, producing children who would become known as the Nephilim. Enoch's record is shocking not only for its content, but for its detail. He writes of names, of leaders, of their deliberate choice to abandon their station. This was no accident, no passing temptation. It was a coordinated descent, a deliberate corruption of God's design. And from that decision, the world itself would begin to unravel. Pause for a moment and consider the weight of this. If angels, who beheld the face of God, could fall so far, what does that say about humanity's own frailty? If they, with all their knowledge, could be driven by lust and pride, how much more vulnerable are we who walk daily among temptation? The story of the Watchers is not just about them. It is a mirror reflecting the danger of compromise, the destruction that follows desire unchecked. But the Watchers did not stop at taking wives. Once they had entered the world of men, they began to teach what was never meant to be taught: forbidden secrets, hidden knowledge, They shared with mankind the arts of sorcery, the craft of weapons, the reading of the stars. They revealed mysteries of heaven and earth that humanity was not ready to bear. What began as curiosity soon became corruption, and what was meant for guidance became a source of ruin. Their actions provoked heaven itself. For the Watchers were not only betraying their mission, they were reshaping creation. In their lust, they blurred the line between the divine and the human. In their pride, they armed mankind with tools of destruction. And in their rebellion, they invited judgment that would shake the earth. Enoch's account lingers on the tragedy of this choice. He presents the Watchers not as misunderstood heroes, but as beings who surrendered to their own desires, knowing full well the cost. They sought glory in the eyes of men rather than obedience to their Creator. And in that decision, they sowed seeds of violence and despair that would lead to the Great Flood. But perhaps the most chilling aspect is this. The Watchers believed they could outwit the divine plan. They thought their oath would protect them, that their unity would shield them from consequence. Yet history tells us otherwise. No pact, no brotherhood, can stand against the judgment of God. And still, one question remains. Why does Genesis only hint at this story? Why just a single verse, a cryptic mention of the Nephilim, when Enoch records entire chapters of detail? Was this knowledge deliberately hidden? Was it too dangerous, too disturbing for the world to bear? For centuries, church fathers debated whether the story of the Watchers was history, allegory, or heresy. But what cannot be denied is that this tale has echoed through myths and legends across cultures, from the Titans of Greece to the sky gods of Mesopotamia. What if these stories are all fragments of the same truth, scattered across the world? What if every culture's memory of gods descending to take mortal wives is but a shadow of this one event, the descent of the Watchers? Enoch paints the picture vividly, a world trembling under the weight of celestial rebellion, a sky once pure now darkened by beings who chose passion over purpose. And though their sin began in secret, its consequences would soon shake the earth itself. Because from this unholy union would be born a race unlike any seen before. Giants of immense strength and violent rule. The Nephilim, the men of renown, the destroyers of earth. Genesis tells us only a fragment. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. They were the mighty men of old, men of renown. A single verse, yet it opens the door to one of the most mysterious and troubling chapters in human history. Who were these Nephilim, these giants born from a union never meant to be, and why did their presence on earth provoke such fear and destruction? The Book of Enoch expands this single line into a chilling narrative. The children of the Watchers and human women were not ordinary. They were enormous in stature, towering over humanity, their very presence a reminder of the rebellion that birthed them. Legends describe their size as so great that a man could stand beside them and look no higher than their knees. Their voices shook the valleys, their hands could tear trees from the ground. To the people of the ancient world, they seemed more like gods than men, beings of terrifying power and insatiable hunger. But with their strength came violence. Enoch describes them as devouring the labor of men, consuming not only animals, but eventually even turning on mankind itself. Their appetite was endless, their dominance unchecked. They filled the earth with bloodshed, leaving human communities in fear and despair. The giants became tyrants, ruling not through wisdom or justice, but through sheer force. Where they walked, crops withered. Where they settled, harmony vanished. The very fabric of creation seemed to groan under their weight. Other cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, tell strangely similar stories. The Greeks spoke of the Titans, ancient beings who once challenged the gods. In Mesopotamia, myths tell of demigods who built great cities and waged war with heaven. Even among Native American tribes, legends remain of giants who roamed the land, leaving behind bones and weapons too large for ordinary men to wield. Could all of these stories point back to the same truth, the age of the Nephilim? The Nephilim were not simply large humans. They represented a corruption of God's order, a distortion of creation itself. Their bloodline was neither fully divine nor fully human, but something in between, a hybrid race born of rebellion. And it is here that the true horror emerges. The giants were not just a physical threat. They were a spiritual infection, a mingling of heaven's power with earth's weakness, creating a generation that despised both God and man. Their presence spread corruption across the earth, and violence became the language of nations. Imagine living in those days, looking up to see figures as tall as city walls, their shadows swallowing the sun, their laughter echoing across mountains. To the powerless, they were monsters. To the ambitious, they were idols. To God, they were a cancer that could not remain. The Nephilim became the rulers of legend, the so-called men of renown, whose names would echo long after their destruction. But renown is not the same as righteousness. Their fame was written in blood, their glory built on terror. And here lies a striking parallel to our own time. We too live in an age of giants, not of physical stature, but of influence and power. Corporations, governments, and systems tower over ordinary lives, consuming resources and shaping destinies. The story of the Nephilim is not just an ancient myth. It is a mirror, reminding us that whenever power grows unchecked, it threatens to devour those it was meant to serve. What began as rebellion in the heavens still echoes in the structures of our world today. But the giants did not come by accident. They were the direct consequence of the Watcher's lust, a living testimony to what happens when boundaries are broken. Their existence posed a question to humanity itself. Would mankind bow before them as gods, or resist them as abominations? In many ways, this question still lingers. For whenever we encounter forces greater than ourselves, forces that demand our allegiance or our fear, we face the same choice. Do we worship the giant, or do we remember the Creator who stands above them? The ancient texts say the Nephilim's violence became so great, their corruption so deep, that the very earth cried out to heaven for relief. Their reign could not last forever. Even angels trembled at what had been unleashed, for the giants were proof that even heaven's glory, when twisted, could become earth's nightmare. The stage was set for divine intervention. Judgment was coming, and nothing, not the strength of the Nephilim, nor the oaths of the Watchers, could prevent it. But before that judgment fell, there was one more step in their descent. The Watchers, emboldened by their offspring, began to pass secrets into human hands, secrets that would darken the future even more than the presence of the giants. What they revealed would change the destiny of mankind, and it would mark the beginning of a corruption so deep that only a flood could wash it away. And so, the story turns. The Nephilim were the embodiment of rebellion, but they were not the final gift of the Watchers. For in their arrogance, these fallen angels chose to open heaven's treasury of knowledge, placing in human hands what humanity was never meant to hold. The giants were terrifying enough. Their sheer size and hunger threatened to consume the earth. But what came next was even more dangerous, for it reached into the very heart of humanity itself. The Watchers, no longer content with simply taking wives and producing monstrous offspring, began to reveal knowledge that was never meant for human hands. They opened the vaults of heaven and poured out secrets that twisted the destiny of mankind. What was intended as guidance became corruption. What should have uplifted became a weapon of destruction. Enoch records that each of the Watchers taught something different, passing down mysteries of heaven and earth to their human companions. Azazel taught men to forge weapons, swords, knives, and shields of war. With fire and iron, he placed in their hands the power to kill on a scale never before imagined. War spread across the earth, not as skirmishes between tribes, but as organized slaughter. The gift of metal became the curse of blood. Others taught the art of enchantments. Incantations whispered in the dark. Magic and sorcery became common practice, calling upon spirits and unseen forces. What had been forbidden was now flaunted, binding humanity to powers they could not control. Women were taught the use of cosmetics and adornments, seemingly harmless. Yet in Enoch's account, it was not vanity alone but a deeper corruption, a way of distorting God's creation and drawing men into temptation. Even the heavens themselves were no longer safe from human curiosity, for the Watchers unveiled the secrets of astrology. They taught how to read the stars, not as signs of God's order, but as instruments of fate, chaining human lives to celestial movements rather than the will of their Creator. Piece by piece, the Watchers dismantled the innocence of humanity. Knowledge that might have been harmless in its time and place became destructive when revealed too soon, without wisdom, without restraint. Like children playing with fire, mankind embraced these forbidden gifts, and the world began to burn. Consider how these revelations echo even into our present age. Today, we too wield knowledge that can either heal or destroy. Nuclear fire, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, tools of astonishing potential, yet also of terrifying consequence. The question remains the same. What happens when knowledge runs ahead of wisdom? What happens when we hold in our hands the power of gods, but the hearts of children? The story of the Watchers is not simply ancient. It is a warning that stretches across millennia, reminding us that not all knowledge is a blessing. Enoch emphasizes that these secrets were not given out of compassion, but out of rebellion. The Watchers sought to elevate themselves, to draw humanity into their orbit, to build loyalty through gifts that could never be taken back. They corrupted creation not only through their offspring, the Nephilim, but through every mind and hand that used their teachings. Humanity was no longer walking in innocence. It was running headlong into destruction, armed with weapons it did not understand. The effect was catastrophic. Violence increased. Rituals bound men to spirits. The natural order was overturned, and the cries of the oppressed reached the heavens. What had begun with desire had grown into full-scale corruption of the world. The line between the sacred and the profane blurred until chaos reigned. It is here that the story takes on a tragic beauty. For in Greek mythology, Prometheus steals fire from the gods to give to mankind. He is hailed as a hero, a bringer of progress. But in Enoch's account, the fire given was not a gift of hope, but a curse of ruin. The Watchers were no heroes. They were traitors, thieves who used the treasures of heaven to enslave humanity rather than free it. Their knowledge became chains, and mankind wore them willingly. Pause and let that sink in. How often in our own world do we chase after knowledge, innovation, or advancement, without asking whether we are ready for the responsibility it brings? We are quick to seek progress, but slow to seek wisdom. The Watcher's downfall is not just a tale of angels. It is a mirror of human ambition, unchecked and unrepentant. And yet, the heavens did not remain silent. The corruption of the Watchers, the bloodshed of the Nephilim, the cries of mankind, all of it rose before God. The earth itself was being undone, twisted from its original design. Judgment could not be delayed. The Watchers may have thought themselves secure, bound together by their oath, but the Creator of all saw every act, and he would respond. Enoch describes the moment when heaven's patience ended. The Most High called upon his faithful archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel. Their task was clear: confront the rebels, bind them in chains, and prepare the earth for cleansing. The punishment would be severe, and it would serve as an eternal reminder that no rebellion, however bold, could escape the justice of God. But before the judgment fell, one question remained unanswered. Could the corruption of humanity be reversed? Or had the Watchers gone too far, leaving behind a legacy that no flood, no fire, could ever fully erase? The story now teeters on the edge of catastrophe. Giants roam the earth. Forbidden knowledge poisons the nations. Angels themselves have fallen into disgrace. The stage is set for one of the greatest acts of divine judgment in history. And as the waters begin to stir, as the heavens prepare to open, we are left to ask, was the great flood sent not only to cleanse humanity, but to erase the shadow of the Nephilim once and for all? The cries of the earth had become unbearable. Blood stained the soil, violence filled every corner, and the hearts of men were enslaved to corruption. The Watchers had broken the order of heaven, and the Nephilim, their monstrous offspring, ravaged the earth with cruelty and hunger. Humanity was no longer innocent clay in the hands of the Creator. It had become fractured, polluted, drowning in sin. And so, the judgment of God began to stir like a storm gathering on the horizon. Enoch describes a vision where the archangels stand before the throne of God. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel lift their voices in lament. The earth cries out because of the lawlessness of mankind. Will you not act, O Lord of all creation? It is a haunting image. Even the holy angels cannot bear to watch the ruin of what was once called good. Heaven itself is disturbed by the chaos on earth. Then comes the decree. God commands his faithful angels to intervene. To Michael, bind the watchers, those who have corrupted themselves with women, until the day of judgment. To Raphael, heal the earth, for it has been wounded by the deeds of Azazel. Cast him into the desert, into darkness, until the great day. To Gabriel, destroy the giants, the children of the watchers and mankind, and purge the earth of their violence. Each angel receives a mission. The rebellion of heaven's sons would not go unanswered. Enoch tells us that the watchers, realizing their fate, begged for mercy. They asked Enoch to intercede, to carry their petition before God. Imagine the sight. Mighty angels, once radiant beings of light, now trembling in fear, pleading through a man of dust. But when Enoch delivers their request, the answer is final. Their prayers will not be heard. Their sentence is sealed. The watchers will be bound in chains beneath the mountains, imprisoned in darkness until the last judgment. There is no escape. The giants, meanwhile, are left to their fate. Gabriel is commanded to turn them against one another, to let them destroy themselves in endless battles until their blood soaks the earth. The creatures that once terrified mankind are brought down by their own violence, victims of the very chaos they unleashed. Their roars fade into silence. Their towering forms crumble into dust. Yet even in their death, their spirits linger, restless and unclean. In later Jewish and Christian tradition, these disembodied spirits are the origin of demons, wandering the earth, seeking to afflict humanity. The shadow of the watchers never fully disappears. And then, a flood. Scripture tells us in Genesis that the earth was filled with corruption, and God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence." Noah is chosen not because he is perfect, but because he is faithful, a remnant untouched by the corruption of the watchers. To him is given a task of impossible scale. Build an ark, a vessel of salvation, as the waters of judgment prepare to sweep across the world. Imagine the scene as the first drops begin to fall. Dark clouds roll across the sky. The people laugh at Noah, mocking his warnings of destruction. But soon the laughter is drowned out by thunder. The heavens break open, the fountains of the deep burst forth, and water engulfs the land. Homes, temples, monuments, all vanish beneath the rising flood. The cries of the Nephilim, the wails of the corrupted, echo briefly before being silenced forever. What had once seemed eternal power, giants, weapons, sorcery, now lies helpless against the fury of creation itself. For 40 days and nights the waters prevail, covering even the highest mountains. Every breath of life outside the ark perishes. The rebellion of the watchers, the corruption of mankind, the violence of the giants, all is swept away. The flood is not simply a natural disaster. It is divine surgery, a cleansing that cuts away the infected flesh of creation to preserve its beating heart. Only Noah, his family, and the creatures within the ark remain, a seed of hope floating above a drowned world. But judgment is never the final word. After the waters recede, after the ark comes to rest, a covenant is made. God sets a rainbow in the sky, a sign of mercy and restraint. Never again would he destroy the earth with floodwaters, though mankind would still stumble and fall. The rainbow is both a promise and a warning. Mercy is real, but so is judgment. And the memory of the watchers, buried beneath stone and water, lingers as a testimony of what happens when the order of heaven is shattered. What does this mean for us now? It means that corruption, no matter how strong, is never beyond the eyes of God. It means that justice, though delayed, will always come. It also means that mercy still shines, even in the darkest storm. The story of the watchers is not just about destruction. It is about the seriousness of sin, the certainty of judgment, and the persistence of hope. But here lies the mystery. If the flood wiped away the Nephilim and bound the watchers, why do echoes of their presence still appear in later scriptures? Why do giants reemerge in the land of Canaan? Why do demons still haunt the pages of the New Testament? It seems the shadow of the watchers was not entirely erased, which raises a chilling question. Was the flood a final judgment, or merely the beginning of a much longer war? The story of the watchers and the Nephilim is more than an ancient myth. It is a warning carved into the fabric of history, a testimony of what happens when heavenly order collides with human desire. From the descent of the Watchers to the birth of the giants, from the forbidden knowledge that reshaped civilizations to the flood that swept it all away, we see a cycle of rebellion, corruption, judgment, and mercy. It is a story that begins in heaven, unfolds on earth, and echoes into eternity. Yet even after the flood, the shadows did not entirely vanish. Scripture hints that giants still walked the land in the days of Israel. Anakim, Rephaim, Goliath himself, a descendant of those ancient mighty ones. How could this be if the Nephilim were destroyed? Did their bloodline somehow survive through the wives of Noah's sons? Or do the echoes of these beings return in cycles, like a wound that never fully heals? Scholars still debate, and believers still wonder. And what of the Watchers? Bound beneath mountains, awaiting the great judgment, their sentence is severe yet incomplete. The Book of Jude speaks of angels who did not keep their proper domain, who are reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Their story is not finished. The prison holds, but the final judgment has not yet come, which leads us to a sobering realization. If their influence began before the flood, could it still linger even now? Could their forbidden knowledge, warfare, sorcery, manipulation of nature, still shape the course of nations? These questions are not easily dismissed, especially when we see humanity once again reaching for powers it may not be ready to wield. For us today, the tale of the Watchers and the Nephilim becomes a mirror. It reflects the dangers of unchecked desire, the seduction of knowledge without wisdom, the violence that follows when power is worshipped above God. But it also reveals something deeper, that no corruption, however vast, can escape the justice of the Creator. The flood was terrible, but it was also an act of mercy, preserving a remnant so that life could begin anew. And perhaps that is the lesson we most need in our time. That though the shadows of the Watchers may whisper, though the spirit of the Nephilim may echo in legends of giants and in the restless forces of evil, there is still a God who remembers his creation. A God who judges, but also redeems. A God who sees, even when the world grows dark. So we are left with a question that cannot be answered with certainty, but one that lingers like thunder in the distance. If the Watchers once walked among us, and if their influence was only chained but never destroyed, could their shadow still be shaping the world we live in today? This mystery will not end here. In the next part of our journey, we will uncover the prophecies of Enoch himself. Visions of the end of days, when the Watchers' fate and the destiny of humanity converge in the final judgment. These are not just ancient warnings. They are glimpses of the future, a future that may be closer than we think. If you have followed this story to the end, it means the mystery has spoken to you as well. And if you want to discover what comes next, what Enoch foresaw about the end of the age, make sure you join us in the next episode. Because the Watcher's story is not only about the past, it may be the key to understanding the future.